Captain Ibrahim Traoré's Special Command Center. Emergency signals from 3 different countries began appearing on screens almost simultaneously. The first alert from Mali reported unusual activity among military units in the capital, Bamako. The second alarm from Niger concerned a security threat against the president. The third urgent message from Ghana announced that a sabotage attempt had been detected in critical infrastructure systems at T-Port. This could not be a coincidence. No one would believe that such critical events happening simultaneously in 3 neighboring countries in a single night was mere chance. Standing before the giant screens in the command center, Traoré found the scene before him, challenging all his intelligence, training, and experience. At 34 years old, as one of Africa's youngest leaders, he had witnessed many crises, but this was different. This was a coordinated attack, and the target wasn't just 3 countries, but the stability of all West Africa. The data flowing on the screens showed how critical the situation was becoming with each passing minute. Tanks in Mali had started moving into the streets. In Niger, an attack on the presidential convoy had been discovered to be planned. In Ghana, the electricity grid was being targeted. The simultaneous eruption of these 3 crises revealed a truth Traoré had long suspected. An invisible force in West Africa was conducting coordinated operations to undermine the region's stability. This force had identified each country's weak points, chosen their most vulnerable moments, and planned simultaneous attacks. Mali's political fragility, Niger's security vulnerabilities, Ghana's infrastructure dependency, everything had been calculated perfectly. The emergency files in Traoré's hands detailed how serious the situation was in each country. In Mali, 3 different military unit commanders in the capital, Bamako, had held secret meetings among themselves, preparing plans to seize the presidential palace. According to intelligence reports, the coup attempt would begin at 4 a.m. dawn. In Niger, a bomb had been detected, placed along the convoy route while the president was going to a critical African Union meeting the next day. In Ghana, a cyber attack was being organized against container loading systems and electrical infrastructure at T-Port, the beating heart of the country's economy. It was clear that there was a common hand behind these 3 crises. The timing, methodology, and targets of each operation bore the hallmarks of a professional intelligence organization. When Traoré looked at the map in the command center, he noticed that the 3 countries strategically surrounded BurkinaFaso. This was a message. The instability in these 3 countries would also affect BurkinaFaso, weakening Traoré, who was the region's leader. More importantly, it would deal a blow to the independence movement rising in Africa. The decisions Traoré would make that night would determine the future not only of 3 countries but of all West Africa. His resources were limited. Burkina Faso's military capacity was not large, enough to conduct operations in 3 countries simultaneously. Diplomatic channels would not be sufficient at this level of urgency. The international community could not act until morning. The only solution was extraordinary coordination, perfect timing, and developing different strategies suited to each country's special conditions. In his first decision that night at the command center, Traoré activated 3 separate operation teams. Simultaneously, each team would intervene in the crisis in a different country using its own unique tactics. The Mali team would consist of military coup experts, the Niger team of security and protection specialists, and the Ghana team of cybersecurity experts. This would be one of the rare examples in modern history of a single leader managing simultaneous crisis management in 3 different countries in one night. At 22:15, the Mali operation began. An urgent call was made to Colonel Traoré's most trusted contact in Mali. Goa was the person who best knew the military situation in Bamako and was in a position to take the necessary steps to prevent the coup attempt. The phone conversation was critical. Traoré conveyed the details of the coup plan to Gotia and proposed a counter-operation. Colonel said, "Traoré, Mali's future is in danger tonight, but we can still prevent it. What we need is speed and courage." Gowit's response was unhesitating. "Captain Traoré, I await your orders." This trust was an indicator of Traoré's prestige in the region. The operation plan in Mali quickly took shape. The 3 commanders involved in the coup attempt would be detained. Simultaneously, before midnight, the mobilization of reliable units for this operation had to be completed within just 2 hours. At the same time, at 2230, the Niger operation was activated. Direct communication was established with General Chani, Niger's presidential security chief. Traoré shared the intelligence he had obtained about the bomb threat and requested that the convoy route be changed immediately. General, said Traoré, the president's life is in danger. Tomorrow's meeting is of critical importance, but first we must ensure security. While General Chiani questioned the accuracy of Traoré's intelligence, he also realized the magnitude of the risk. Captain, I don't know where this information comes from, but if it's true, this means an international conspiracy was right. An intelligence operation of this level could only be organized at the state level. At 2245, the Ghana operation reached its critical phase. Traoré's cybersecurity experts began analyzing the source codes of the attack, targeting T-Port. The attack was designed to completely halt port operations, paralyze Ghana's export capacity. More importantly, this attack would also spread to Ghana's electricity grid, creating darkness across the country. In an urgent meeting with Ghana's President Akufo-Addo, the seriousness of the situation was explained. Mr. President, said Traoré, your country's critical infrastructure is under attack. This is not just economic sabotage, but a political move. If we don't act together, the damage will take years to repair. Akufo-Addo took Traoré's warning seriously. An emergency order was given to Ghana's cybersecurity units. All digital systems at T-Port were temporarily shut down, switching to manual operation. This move stopped the attack, but also disrupted the port's operations. As midnight approached, all three operations had reached their critical phases. In Mali, commanders involved in the coup attempt were being detained. In Niger, the president's security measures were being increased. And in Ghana, the cyber attack was being repelled, but none of the operations were yet completed. The slightest mistake could lead to disasters in all three countries. At 0045, the first news came from Mali. Two of the commanders involved in the coup attempter had been successfully detained, but the third had managed to escape at the last moment. The coup plan had largely collapsed, but the danger had not completely passed. Colonel Goita's message to Traoré summarized the situation. Mali is saved, but we must remain vigilant. Some elements are still dangerous. At 1:30 a.m., mixed news began coming from Niger as well. Bomb disposal experts had found and neutralized explosives hidden along the president's convoy route. However, who the attackers were had not been fully identified. The assassination attempt had been prevented, but the perpetrators were still at large. General Chani's message to Traoré was, "Worrying Captain, you saved a life, but other branches of this network may still be active." At 2:15 a.m., the Ghana operation was also partially successful. The source of the cyber attack had been identified and stopped, but Timaport systems had suffered partial damage. Power outages had occurred in some areas of the electricity grid, but a complete collapse had been prevented. President Akufo-Addo's message to Traoré was full of gratitude, which prevented a bigger crisis. Ghana will not forget this help. At 6 a.m., all three operations had been completed. In a single night, 3 different crises in 3 different countries had been largely prevented. The coup attempt in Mali had been thwarted, the assassination plan in Niger had been stopped, and the sabotage in Ghana had been repelled. While not a complete success, much larger disasters had been prevented. This was one of the notable successes in modern diplomatic history. As Traoré reviewed the final reports in the command center that morning, he fully grasped the importance of the night. This wasn't just about saving 3 countries. This was a demonstration of Africa's unity and solidarity power. It was proof of how African countries could stand together against the divide-and-conquer strategy of external forces. Even though each operation hadn't gone perfectly, the most important goal had been achieved. Major disasters had been prevented. The most important factor in the operation's success was Traoré's trust and prestige in the region. All 3 country leaders had trusted his intelligence and taken his recommendations seriously. This trust was the fruit of years of diplomatic efforts. Traoré was seen as a reliable leader, not only for BurkinaFaso, but for all West Africa. The technical dimension of the operation was also noteworthy. Dealing with 3 different types of crisis in 3 different countries simultaneously required serious coordination and expertise Traoré's team had developed. appropriate strategies for each situation, and had adjusted timing as well as possible. Even though everything hadn't gone perfectly, the right decisions had been made at the most critical points. More importantly, the operation had been carried out without major bloodshed. The arrests in Mali had been conducted mostly peacefully. The bomb in Niger had been neutralized by disposal experts, and the cyber attack in Ghana had been repelled. Through technical methods, this was the triumph of intelligence and diplomacy rather than the use of force. With the first light of morning, the international dimension of the operation also began to emerge. The African Union welcomed Traoré's success. With appreciation, the EU and UN announced their support for the efforts shown for regional stability. Even the U.S. State Department announced that it welcomed Traoré's leadership with praise. The most interesting reaction probably came from the forces behind the operations. Although no one was officially accused, it was obvious that the crisis occurring simultaneously in three countries were not coincidental. The largely unsuccessful outcome of these operations was a serious disappointment for the forces behind them. The operation's resonance in the African press was significant. Headlines such as "The Knight's Protector," "West Africa's Savior," an example of regional leadership appeared in newspapers. Traoré began to be seen as a respected leader not only in BurkinaFaso, but throughout the region. Following this success, Traoré proposed establishing a new security cooperation network among African countries. This network, established under the name West Africa Early Warning System, aimed to prevent similar coordinated attacks. Senegal and Côte also joined the system. Alongside Mali, Niger, and Ghana, each country's intelligence services would share critical information and act together against common threats. The long-term results of the operation were also important. Relations between Mali, Niger, and Ghana with BurkinaFaso were strengthened, while mutual trust increased, security cooperation deepened. This contributed to accelerating regional integration. Traoré's prestige also increased with this operation. His words began to be listened to more in African Union meetings. West African countries took Traoré's recommendations on security matters seriously. International media also began to describe him as a rising African leader. But the most important gain for Traoré was showing Africa's unity potential. This operation was proof of how the continent could resist external interventions. African countries could cope with great challenges when they acted together. The operation also had a significant psychological impact. African peoples now believed that their own leaders could protect them, while the perception of dependence on external forces decreased. Self-confidence increased. This strengthened political and economic independence movements. Most importantly, this operation strengthened Africa's position in world politics. Africa was now seen not just as a continent receiving aid, but as a force that could solve its own problems and even help its neighbors. This change in perception increased Africa's voice in international relations. A year after the operation, no similar coordinated attack attempt occurred. The effective functioning of the early warning system and the strengthening of regional solidarity had deterred potential attackers. West Africa became more secure and stable. In his speech on the first anniversary of this operation, Traoré revealed the secret of success. Strength lies not in weapons, but in being together. Africa's power emerges when we are in solidarity. That night, we tried to save 3 countries, but we actually protected Africa's soul. On the second anniversary of the operation, the Africa Security Cooperation Protocol was signed. This protocol formalized member counts obligation to help each other in emergencies. Traoré's initiative that night had transformed into a permanent institutional structure. The operation also had positive economic effects. The 3 countries that received intervention that night significantly increased their trade volume with each other. Joint security investments were developed. Particularly, the security systems of Ghana's DMA port were strengthened with joint financing from the 3 countries. In the days immediately following the operation, international intelligence circles began examining that night's events. Reports from the CIA, MI6, and other Western intelligence services confirmed that there was a sophisticated organization behind the coordinated attacks, although the identity of this organization could not be fully determined. The complexity and timing of the operation indicated the presence of state-level support's performance that night also provided important clues about the capacity of African intelligence services. The fact that Burkina Faso's relatively small intelligence organization could simultaneously detect operations in 3 different countries showed that information-sharing networks in the region were more developed than thought. This situation revealed the potential that African countries possessed in security matters. The psychological dimension of the operation also created long-term effects. Traoré's success that night created a new paradigm, not only for crisis management, but also for African leadership. It was proven that young, dynamic leaders who could use technology could achieve more effective results than traditional diplomacy. This situation also became a source of inspiration for other young leaders on the continent. The economic implications of the operation were also noteworthy. The financial markets of the 3 countries saved that night showed stability immediately after the events. When investors saw that regional security mechanisms were working, their confidence in African investments increased. This situation created new investment opportunities, especially in infrastructure and technology sectors. One of the most important developments was the activation of the Africa Crisis Intervention Center established after the operation. This center, established in Addis Ababa, aimed to detect and prevent similar crises in advance. The center had the capacity to predict potential threats 48 hours in advance, using artificial intelligence-supported analysis systems. Traoré's leadership style in the operation also became the subject of academic studies. Researchers from Harvard, Oxford, and Sorbonne universities began studies on multiple crisis leadership. Traoré's decision-making process that night began to be taught as case analysis in leadership under stress and international crisis management courses. The technological dimension of the operation could not be ignored either. The cyber monitoring systems used by BurkinaFaso also attracted the interest of other countries in the region. Ghana, Mali, and Niger signed technical cooperation agreements with BurkinaFaso to establish similar technological infrastructures. This situation accelerated efforts to develop indigenous technology in Africa. Finally, the cultural impact of the operation was also significant. African musicians wrote songs about that night. Artists produced works praising Traoré's leadership. The song titled 3 Heroes in One Night became a widely listened hit throughout Africa. This cultural impact ensured that the operation remained in memory and played an important role in its transmission to future generations. The operation's influence on African literature was equally profound. Several novels and poems were written chronicling that historic night, with writers across the continent finding inspiration in Traoré's decisive leadership. University writing programs began including the events as case studies in creative writing courses, showing how real-life heroism could inspire artistic expression. Educational institutions throughout Africa incorporated the operation into their curricula as well. Business schools analyzed Traoré's crisis management techniques, while military academies studied the coordination methods employed. The operation became a standard case study for demonstrating effective leadership under extreme pressure and time constraints. The technological innovations that emerged from the crisis also had lasting impact. The communication systems developed that night for coordinating multiple operations simultaneously were later adapted for civilian emergency response. Several African countries requested access to these technologies, leading to the establishment of a continent-wide emergency communication network that strengthened disaster preparedness across the region. Traoré's brave stance that night thus became not only a military and diplomatic success, but also a catalyst for Africa's spiritual and cultural rebirth. The ripple effects of that single night continued to transform the continent, proving that decisive leadership at crucial moments could change the trajectory of history itself.